Tensions have been building in the Middle East all year, and it feels like we're at a boiling point. We're talking about a really delicate situation, a powder keg, with global powers getting involved. So today, we're going to try to give everyone listening a clear picture of what exactly is happening, why it matters to you, and what to watch out for.
It's a complicated story to untangle, that's for sure. But we have to understand all the players and what they want if we're going to figure out what could happen.
Right, exactly. So let's go back to October of last year, 2023. Hamas launches a surprise attack on Israel. Seems like everything goes back to that. What's the background on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as shocking as that attack was, it was really just the latest flare-up between Israel and Iran. They've got a long history. Iran uses groups like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon to throw their weight around. And those groups and Israel, well, they have a history of conflict. And Iran's been giving them money and weapons.
So Iran has been sort of supplying weapons to their allies, but not directly getting involved in the fighting.
Exactly. Until now, that is. They've gone from whispering to shouting from the rooftops now that they're firing missiles at Israel. It's a completely different ballgame now. And the whole world's watching.
Yeah, and the loudest voice has got to be Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. I was looking at his social media, and he is not holding back. He called it a decisive response to Israeli aggression, even threatened Netanyahu directly, told Israel not to enter into a conflict with Iran.
Which is really interesting when you think about it, because those statements aren't just for show. They're about survival for the Iranian regime. See, they've got crippling economic sanctions, and people are unhappy. Pezeshkian needs to distract them, get them riled up against a common enemy.
So he's projecting strength to the outside world and to his own people.
Yeah, but it's a risky game. Every time he raises the stakes, it ups the ante. And the Middle East is volatile. Even the most carefully planned move can backfire.
And we've already seen reactions from around the globe, the U.S., France, Germany, the UN. Even they've all condemned the attacks, right? They've called for a ceasefire. But it's interesting how those reactions are playing out.
Oh, absolutely. That's an important thing to recognize. The UN, they called for a ceasefire from both sides, but they specifically condemned Israel going into Lebanon, called it a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. The world's response to Israel's been a lot stronger than to Iran's initial missile launches, which I think speaks volumes.
It's like they're watching Israel under a microscope, even though Iran made the first move.
Well, yeah, and you have to think about it. Israel and the West, especially the U.S., they've got this long history together when it comes to security. So the world judges their actions differently, especially when we're talking about international law.
And speaking of getting caught in the crossfire, what about Lebanon? It's a tough situation for them, right? Hezbollah is operating right there within their borders, and now Israel is conducting these ground incursions against Hezbollah in Lebanon. It feels like they're on the verge of becoming a battleground.
And that is a terrifying thought for the people in Lebanon. I mean, think about it. They're already dealing with a terrible economy. Their government is unstable, and they've got deep divisions within their own society. Then you add Hezbollah to the mix, a heavily armed group, and yeah, things could easily spiral out of control.
It's like they're trying to rebuild their house while a hurricane rages around them. So fragile.
Wow, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it shows why people are so worried about this conflict. We aren't just talking about a war between countries. This could be a humanitarian disaster. Millions of people displaced, a whole region thrown into chaos.
Okay, so let's talk about those potential consequences. What's the best case scenario? What needs to happen to stop things from getting even worse?
Well, ideally, everybody would just take a deep breath and calm down. We need a ceasefire, maybe with some help from other countries. Iran needs to know that their interests are safe, and Israel needs security guarantees from both Iran and Hezbollah.
That's a tall order, isn't it? Especially with the level of distrust between all these groups.
It is. It really is. But we've seen it before, haven't we? Even the most impossible situations can be solved if everyone talks to each other, even if it takes time and compromise. But, you know, there are other scenarios too, and some aren't so optimistic.
Right, let's talk about those. What's the middle ground look like here?
Well, the middle ground, which is what I think is most likely in the short term, is that we see more of these skirmishes, maybe even more missile attacks from Iran, but it doesn't turn into a huge regional war. It's this balancing act where each side is trying to be the alpha dog without actually starting a huge fight.
But even then, even if they are trying to be careful, the risk of someone misinterpreting something, of a mistake happening, it's still there.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes this whole situation so scary. All it takes is one wrong move, one misunderstanding, one thing nobody saw coming, and everything could explode.
Which brings us to the worst case scenario. I think we both know where this is going, but for our listeners, what happens if this escalates beyond those limited strikes?
Well, the worst case is a regional war, and it's terrifying to even think about. Imagine Israel launches a full-on invasion of Lebanon. Hezbollah retaliates with everything they've got, and then Iran's military jumps in to support them. The U.S., because they have treaties with Israel, they get pulled in to defend them. And from there, it's impossible to say how far it could go.
It's like that old saying, the only thing more dangerous than a determined enemy is an unpredictable one. And right now, there are a lot of determined players on that board, all making moves. And then you've got the wild cards. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt. They could completely change the game depending on what they decide to do.
Don't forget about the rest of the world either. This isn't just a Middle Eastern conflict anymore. It has the potential to drag in the entire world.
It's like you said, what happens over there matters to all of us no matter where we are. It's a chain reaction waiting to happen.
Exactly. Even if a conflict starts on the other side of the world, we could all feel the impact.
It makes you think about how connected everything is, how what happens in one place can ripple out and affect everyone.
That's exactly why we need to pay attention, understand what's going on, and talk about how we got here and where we might be going.
So as we're trying to make sense of everything,
Mm-hmm.
what should we be watching for in the next few days and weeks? What are the signs that things could really blow up?
Well, Iran is key. Will they be satisfied with these missile strikes, or are they going to get even more aggressive? Whatever they do next is going to determine how this whole thing plays out.
What about the United States? They've been very vocal about supporting Israel. But how far will they actually go?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The Biden administration is in a really tough spot. We know they'll use military force if they have to, but they also don't want to get stuck in another long war in the Middle East. Everything depends on what they do or don't do over the next few weeks.
And of course, we have to keep an eye on Lebanon. It's such a fragile situation, and if it gets worse there, it could be the spark that lights a much bigger fire.
Absolutely. Lebanon is like a microcosm of all the problems in the region. The political instability, the economic problems, the tensions between different groups, the powerful armed groups. If things really go south in Lebanon, the whole region will feel it.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It feels like we're at a turning point. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
You know, even when things look really bad, we can't give up on peace. Diplomacy might seem impossible right now, but it's the only way forward. We have to stay informed, have these tough conversations, and demand better from our leaders. That's what we can do.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In a world where everything is so connected, it's our choices, our words, our actions that shape the future.